The thermometer mounted outside Black Rapids Roadhouse displayed 58 degrees Fahrenheit that morning. Frank Glaser examined it once more, then gazed north toward the Alaska Range, where mountain peaks vanished completely into a white wall. The date was October 15th, 1923. He was 34 years old, and he had just accepted an assignment most men would consider suicide. Track the 40-mile caribou herd through their winter migration, alone on foot with minimal supplies through some of the most punishing terrain on Earth. The assignment would consume 6 months. 6 months alone in the Alaskan wilderness during the darkest, coldest portion of the year. 6 months with no permanent shelter, no resupply, no communication with civilization. 6 months where a single error, a wet boot, a twisted ankle, a miscalculation about food would mean certain death. Frank shouldered his pack, inspected his rifle one final time, and started walking north. Behind him, the roadhouse keeper shook his head slowly. "That man's either the toughest son of a bitch in Alaska," he said, "or the craziest." He paused. "Probably both." This is the account of how Frank Glaser survived 6 months alone in the Alaskan wilderness. How he endured temperatures that would kill most men in hours. How he outwitted wolf packs that had killed experienced trappers. And how he not only survived, but thrived in conditions that seem impossible by modern standards. It is an account of pure grit, wilderness mastery, and the kind of toughness that has almost vanished from the modern world. Frank Glaser was not born in Alaska. He was born in 1889 in the lower 48, in a world of farms and towns and relative comfort. Yet from his earliest years he was drawn to the wild places, to the accounts of trappers and mountain men, to the idea of testing himself against nature in its rawest form. The call of wilderness pulled at him constantly. In May 1915, at the age of 26, Frank arrived in Valdez, Alaska, with a pack sack, some duffels, a new Winchester .30-06, and dreams of adventure. Alaska in 1915 was still genuinely wild. A place where a man could walk for weeks without encountering another human being, where grizzly bears and wolf packs were genuine threats, where survival depended entirely on skill and toughness. This was the frontier in its truest sense. From Valdez, Frank walked 371 miles north to Fairbanks. This was not a casual hike. There was no highway, no trail, just rough country that had to be crossed on foot, carrying everything he possessed. It consumed weeks of hard travel, and when he arrived in Fairbanks, he was lean and hardened and ready for whatever Alaska could deliver. He located work at the Black Rapids Roadhouse, providing meat for road crews building the Richardson Highway. The job paid 25 cents per pound for sheep, caribou, and moose. Frank became a market hunter, investing weeks at a time in the mountains, killing game and packing it out on his back. He learned the country intimately, learned to interpret weather and terrain, learned which mountains held sheep and which valleys the caribou used for migration. He learned to survive alone in country that broke lesser men. Most men cannot handle genuine solitude, the weeks and months with no human contact, nothing but their own thoughts and the vast, indifferent wilderness. Frank thrived on it completely. He became known as Silent Frank, because after investing so much time alone, he had lost the habit of casual conversation. When he did talk, it was to say something worth saying, usually about hunting or weather or the behavior of animals. Words became precious commodities. By 1923, Frank had invested 8 years in Alaska and had established himself as one of the most capable wilderness men in the territory. When the Alaska Game Commission needed someone to follow the caribou herd through their winter migration, to document their movements and numbers, to assess predation by wolves, Frank was the obvious choice. No other man possessed his combination of skills and mental toughness. The assignment was straightforward in concept, yet brutal in execution. The 40-mile caribou herd, numbering in the tens of thousands, migrated each fall from their summer range near the Canadian border to their winter range in the White Mountains, a journey of more than 200 miles through some of the most remote and harsh country in Alaska. The route crossed mountain passes, frozen rivers, and endless expanses of tundra. Frank would follow them on foot, documenting their route, their numbers, the condition of the animals, and the impact of wolf predation. He would depart in mid-October and return in April, a period of 6 months that would include the darkest and coldest portion of the Alaskan winter. He would carry minimal supplies: a rifle, ammunition, a sleeping bag, a tarp, basic cooking gear, and some emergency rations. He would live off the land, hunting caribou and other game for food, building temporary shelters as needed, moving with the herd wherever they traveled. Self-sufficiency would be absolute. The pay was decent by 1923 standards, yet no amount of money could compensate for the hardship and danger. This was a job that required a special kind of man, someone who could endure months of solitude, brutal cold, constant physical exertion, and the ever-present possibility of death from exposure, starvation, or predators. Most men wouldn't even consider it. Frank accepted without hesitation. This was precisely the kind of challenge he had come to Alaska to find. He departed Black Rapids on October 15, 1923, walking north toward Eagle, near the Canadian border where the caribou herd was beginning their migration. The temperature was already below 50, and it would only drop colder as winter deepened. He wore rubber-bottom, leather-top shoe packs, summer-weight woolen clothing, and a Filson wool Mackinaw jacket. He carried several pots and pans, though he would eventually abandon all but one to save weight during the long journey ahead. The opening weeks proved manageable for someone of Frank's experience. The caribou moved at a leisurely pace, grazing as they journeyed, allowing Frank to match their speed without strain. He harvested caribou when hunger demanded, typically choosing younger specimens whose flesh was more palatable and whose pelts were in superior condition. He stored meat throughout his path, concealing it beneath snow where freezing temperatures would preserve it indefinitely for future use when hunting might prove impossible. However, as October gave way to November, conditions worsened dramatically. Temperatures crashed to 60 below and held there for extended periods. Wind velocity increased, producing wind chills capable of freezing bare skin within moments. Heavy snowfall made each step exhausting and erased the terrain features Frank used for navigation. Then the wolves arrived in force. Frank had encountered wolves previously, occasionally hunting them, but never in these quantities or displaying such bold behavior. The 40-mile herd attracted multiple wolf packs, scores of predators altogether, and they brought down caribou nearly every day. Frank would stumble upon slaughter scenes, the snow dyed red, caribou carcasses ripped open, occasionally still radiating warmth. The wolves were aware of Frank's presence. They monitored him from safe distances, their amber eyes following his every action with unsettling intelligence. After dark, he detected their vocalizations, the haunting sounds carrying across the frozen expanse, confirming that he was not isolated, that predators without human fear were studying him as either a competitor or possible target. The howling continued through the night, sometimes near, sometimes distant, always present. Frank didn't experience the terror of wolves that inexperienced individuals feel. He knew that wolves seldom assault healthy adult humans, that they are wary and clever creatures that shun needless conflict. However, he also recognized these weren't typical conditions. The wolves were in predatory mode, trailing an enormous food supply, and their large numbers gave them confidence. A solitary human battling through chest-deep snow, fatigued and freezing, could seem like prey rather than danger to desperate predators. He implemented protective measures carefully. He refused to let his fire die overnight, keeping flames alive to establish a perimeter between himself and the surrounding blackness. He maintained his rifle constantly loaded and accessible. He generated noise while moving through dense vegetation, broadcasting his location, confirming the wolves understood he was present and dangerous. These precautions became daily rituals. Still, the wolves weren't his sole concern. The cold was unrelenting and savage in ways modern individuals struggle to grasp. 60 below zero Fahrenheit freezes naked skin within 60 seconds. It renders steel fragile, causes rubber to shatter, makes each breath agonizing as frozen air burns lung tissue. The environment became actively hostile to human life. Frank's garments, though respectable for 1923, proved insufficient for continuous exposure to these extremes. His wool coat and trousers offered modest protection, but absorbed dampness from perspiration and respiration, and that dampness froze solid, converting his garments into rigid, frozen armor. His footwear maintained dry feet, but offered minimal warmth, demanding he remain perpetually alert for frostbite symptoms. Constant vigilance became necessary for survival. He established a cold management system through hard experience. He walked vigorously throughout daylight, creating internal heat through physical effort. But he needed to prevent excessive sweating because perspiration would crystallize and steal vital body heat. He halted regularly to examine his fingers and toes for frostbite indicators, moving digits repeatedly, searching for the distinctive pale areas signaling frozen flesh. These checks became automatic, almost unconscious. Come nightfall, he would establish both fire and shelter. Shelter typically meant basic protection. Perhaps a wind barrier fashioned from evergreen branches or a cavity hollowed into packed snow. Fire was critical, not merely for heat, but for converting snow into drinking water and preparing meals. Without fire, death would come quickly. Creating fire at 60 below presents serious challenges. Matches fail frequently. Frozen wood resists ignition, and extreme cold drains heat from flames nearly as fast as combustion produces it. Frank had discovered the value of keeping combustible material in interior pockets, warmed by body temperature, ensuring he always possessed a kindling that would ignite from sparks. He learned to position fires in wind-protected areas, allowing flames to strengthen before cold could suppress them. He learned to accumulate excessive firewood, recognizing that severe cold devours fuel at extraordinary rates. These lessons came from years of wilderness experience. His sleeping arrangement represented creative problem-solving and survival necessity. He'd begun his expedition with standard canvas bedding, but it provided inadequate protection against brutal cold. Early November, as mercury fell past 60 below, Frank understood he required better equipment or would die during sleep. The commercial sleeping bags simply couldn't handle the extreme temperatures. He harvested 3 young caribou, deliberately choosing specimens with dense winter fur. He removed their hides, working carefully to preserve completeness and integrity. Next, he processed the hides using traditional brain tanning methods, painstakingly removing all adipose tissue and membrane, applying the animal's brain material to condition the leather, repeatedly stretching and manipulating the material until achieving softness and flexibility. The work was tedious and time-consuming, but absolutely necessary. The process demanded 3 full days of continuous labor, but upon completion, he owned 3 expansive, pliable caribou pelts. He stitched them into a single unit using tendon for cordage, fabricating bedding that offered thickness, warmth, and reasonable portability. The caribou fur delivered outstanding thermal protection, capturing air pockets and forming an effective cold barrier. Nestled inside that handmade sleeping system, with adequate fire nearby, Frank could rest comfortably despite external temperatures reaching 70 below. The sleeping bag became his most valuable possession. The luxury of warm sleep, he would later record in his journal, sustained me through many brutal nights. But nocturnal comfort represented only partial victory. Throughout daylight, Frank needed to maintain movement, tracking the caribou herd as they pressed south and west toward seasonal territories. The work never stopped. The herd advanced at variable speeds, occasionally traveling 20 miles daily, other times remaining nearly stationary. Frank needed to mirror their rhythm, needed to position himself among them, needed to record their patterns and population. This required traversing deep snow, frequently forging paths through accumulations reaching his waist. It required crossing frozen waterways, probing ice cautiously, understanding that breakthrough meant probable death. It required ascending ridges and navigating mountain passages while bearing his pack and weapon, depleted and frozen, yet unable to halt because the herd continued, and he needed to maintain contact. The physical demands were relentless. The physical demands were staggering. Frank was expending thousands of calories daily, merely maintaining body temperature and mobility. He consumed food continuously, primarily caribou flesh, augmented with whatever else he could locate or harvest. He shot ptarmigan whenever spotted, boiled them in his solitary pot, consumed them entirely, including bones for their calcium and marrow. He discovered frozen berries still attached to bushes, collected them, and ate them for their nutrients. He converted snow into drinking water, hydrating constantly to combat the arid, frigid atmosphere. Despite these efforts, his body was slowly consuming itself. Despite consuming massive food quantities, he was shedding weight. His physiology was cannibalizing itself, metabolizing muscle and fat to produce the thermal energy required for survival. His facial features became hollow, his eyes receded, his hands appeared skeletal. Yet he maintained movement, maintained herd proximity, maintained journey documentation. The assignment continued regardless of personal cost. By December, the sun barely climbed above the horizon. At this latitude, during winter's depth, illumination persisted only for brief hours, and even that was feeble gray twilight providing minimal warmth to the frozen terrain. Frank traveled during the abbreviated hours of visibility and established camp during prolonged darkness, crouching beside his fire, detecting the wolves' vocalizations in the distance. Darkness dominated his existence now. The wolves were growing increasingly bold. They had recognized that Frank was trailing the herd, and they appeared to view him with combined curiosity and strategic assessment. They would circle his camps after dark, prowling just outside the firelight's reach, their eyes catching the flame's reflection. Frank would hurl burning branches toward them, yelling, establishing his authority, reinforcing that he was not vulnerable. These nightly confrontations became routine. During one incident in late December, a massive male wolf approached Frank's camp during full daylight. This represented abnormal conduct suggesting either remarkable courage or severe hunger. The wolf halted approximately 50 yards distant, studying Frank, evaluating him. Frank returned the stare, his hand resting on his rifle, prepared to fire if the wolf advanced closer. For extended minutes, the human and the wolf examined each other across the frozen expanse. Then the wolf pivoted and loped away, vanishing into the spruce forest. The encounter left Frank deeply unsettled. Frank never encountered that specific wolf again, yet he never forgot the awareness he observed in its eyes, the deliberation, the impression that the wolf was determining whether Frank merited the danger. As December transitioned to January, Frank arrived at the herd's winter territory in the White Mountains. The caribou dispersed across the valleys and slopes, excavating through snow to access the lichens and dried vegetation below. The migration had essentially concluded, and Frank's duties shifted from tracking the herd to monitoring them, recording their winter conduct, their survival tactics, their wolf encounters. The work changed but didn't diminish. He established a semi-permanent base in a protected valley, constructing a more substantial structure from spruce, timber, and branches. It was not a proper cabin, merely a wind barrier with overhead coverage, yet it surpassed the temporary camps he had been utilizing. He could maintain continuous fire, could dry his garments, could rest without the relentless obligation of constant travel. The stability brought welcome relief. Yet the cold persisted without mercy. January and February represent the coldest months in interior Alaska, and the temperature consistently plummeted below 60, occasionally reaching 70 below or lower. At these extremes, the environment becomes alien and antagonistic in ways defying description. Metal becomes so frigid it will sear skin upon contact. Exhalations freeze immediately, creating ice particles that cascade to the ground, producing a tinkling sound the old-timers termed the whisper of the stars. Trees fracture and detonate as the moisture inside them crystallizes and expands. The world became surreal and deadly. Frank's physiology was adapting to the cold through mechanisms that modern science is only beginning to comprehend. His body now burned fuel at rates that seemed impossible, generating warmth through sheer metabolic intensity. His vascular system had reorganized itself, pulling blood inward from hands and feet to keep vital organs functioning. Cold that would have paralyzed him months earlier now felt almost routine, a strange new baseline for existence. His body had become a survival machine. Yet even remarkable adaptation encounters absolute limits, and Frank was dancing along that edge daily. Frozen tissue claimed portions of his fingers and toes, blackening as cells died from ice crystal formation. His options for treatment were essentially non-existent. Keep the areas clean, hope for the best, accept whatever outcome biology determined. Fortune smiled on him. Skin and superficial tissue sloughed away, yet all digits remained attached and eventually functional. Others had lost far more to frostbite. Snow blindness also struck, that excruciating affliction where sunlight bouncing off white expanses burns the corneas, even during winter's weakest illumination. The agony could be debilitating, turning simple travel into torture as damaged eyes rebelled against any light. Frank adjusted by keeping eyelids partially lowered during travel, limiting exposure while maintaining sufficient vision for navigation, and giving his eyes frequent rest periods. He eventually carved protective eyewear from leather scraps, cutting thin viewing slits that dramatically reduced the punishing glare while still permitting adequate sight. The improvised goggles saved his vision. Wolf presence never diminished throughout those frozen months. Frank's records accumulated dozens upon dozens of documented predation events, revealing intricate details about pack hunting methods, social hierarchies within groups, and how they chose which caribou to pursue. Young animals, aged animals, and those showing injury or illness drew the wolves' attention, easy targets requiring minimal energy expenditure for maximum caloric return. Prime adult caribou usually escaped unharmed, either outpacing their pursuers or wielding hooves as devastating defensive weapons. Frank was witnessing nature's brutal efficiency firsthand. Frank's opinion of wolves evolved from wary concern toward something approaching admiration. Their hunting efficiency was breathtaking, demonstrating teamwork and tactical intelligence that rivaled human planning. They'd survey the entire herd patiently, single out weakness, execute coordinated strikes, and successfully drop prey animals several times their individual weight. Nothing went to waste afterward. Every scrap of meat, every fragment of bone cracked open for rich marrow, everything consumed with thorough efficiency. They were perfect predators. Yet this efficiency came with ecological costs that Frank documented meticulously. Wolves were eliminating caribou at alarming rates, particularly during winter when the ungulates were already battling starvation and thermal stress. Weekly kill counts reached into the dozens. Most victims probably wouldn't have survived winter anyway. Yet the cumulative population impact was undeniable and significant. These observations held tremendous value for wildlife managers, providing hard data that would shape policy decisions for decades following Frank's field season. His work had scientific importance beyond mere survival. March's arrival brought lengthening days as winter's grip gradually weakened. Solar elevation increased noticeably, strengthening light and adding modest warmth that began softening the season's brutal edge. Mercury still registered far below freezing, yet those devastating 60-below plunges became increasingly rare. Spring remained distant but inevitable, and Frank could feel seasonal transition approaching. The caribou sensed it too, showing restlessness as instinct prepared them for the long journey back toward northern summer feeding grounds. The ordeal was nearing its end. Frank recognized his assignment was reaching its conclusion. 6 months of documentation were complete, winter behavior patterns recorded, survival strategies observed, predator interactions cataloged. He'd endured isolation and cold that exceeded human tolerance in almost every measurable way. Return to civilization now beckoned, where he could file comprehensive reports, then finally rest his battered body. The thought of human contact and warm shelter seemed almost unreal. Yet departure required one final ordeal: walking out. His White Mountain camp sat over 100 miles from any human settlement, with absolutely no established trails, no roads, just raw wilderness demanding foot travel while carrying essential gear. Frank organized his equipment, buried excess items he couldn't transport, and began the southward trek. Every step brought him closer to civilization. This exit journey bore little resemblance to his autumn entry. 6 months of relentless cold and continuous physical output had stripped away at least 30 pounds of body mass, possibly significantly more. His garments were threadbare despite repeated repairs. His footwear barely held together through improvised wire and sinew lashing. The rifle still functioned reliably, yet every other piece of equipment showed severe degradation from prolonged harsh condition usage. He was a shadow of his former self physically. Paradoxically, he'd also gained intangible strength that defied quantification. Alaska had thrown everything at him, killing cold, threatening predators, crushing solitude. And he'd not merely survived, but demonstrated genuine mastery. He'd internalized wilderness lessons that transformed him into something rare, a man completely competent in environments that would quickly destroy ordinary people. The experience had forged him into something harder. April 18th, 1924, Frank arrived at Black Rapids Roadhouse, exactly 6 months and 3 days after departing. The keeper struggled to recognize this gaunt, heavily bearded apparition, whose eyes held a 1,000-yard stare, born from prolonged isolation. Yet Frank was undeniably alive and his mission indisputably complete. The keeper could barely believe what he was seeing. How'd it go, the keeper ventured. Frank considered briefly, then offered a minimal shrug. Cold? Seriously cold. That terse assessment was his only immediate comment. Frank possessed no inclination toward theatrical storytelling or self-congratulation. A job existed. He'd completed it. Nothing more required saying. Yet as weeks passed, and he composed his official Game Commission report while physically recuperating, the extraordinary magnitude of his accomplishment became increasingly apparent. What he'd done seemed impossible. He'd produced the first ever complete documentation of the 40-mile herd's winter migration and survival behaviors, generating unprecedented scientific data. Wolf predation dynamics, pack social structures, hunting methodologies, all meticulously recorded. Migration corridors mapped, critical habitat identified, herd health thoroughly assessed. The data would prove invaluable for years to come. Beyond mere data collection, he demonstrated wilderness competence so exceptional it seemed almost superhuman, even by Alaska's notoriously demanding standards. 6 unbroken months of winter solitude, minimal equipment, routine 60 below temperatures, constant wolf presence. This transcended basic survival, representing true environmental mastery. No one had done anything comparable. Word spread rapidly throughout Alaska and beyond. Even hardened trappers and hunters, men intimately familiar with genuine hardship, expressed stunned disbelief. 6 months solo at 60 below? That ain't human capability. That's something else entirely. Yet Frank remained thoroughly, undeniably human. His success stemmed not from impossible abilities, but from acquired skills, meticulous preparation, and iron refusal to quit under any circumstances. He was simply tougher than anyone imagined possible. He'd systematically developed necessary competencies: extreme cold fire starting, hide-based clothing and shelter fabrication, weather interpretation, terrain navigation, wilderness hunting techniques. Mental preparation proved equally crucial, accepting inevitable cold, hunger, and exhaustion as unavoidable conditions, then deciding to persevere regardless. When problems inevitably arose, he adapted instantly. Inadequate sleeping bag? Build a superior replacement. Food running low? Increase hunting effort. Wolves threatening camp? Drive them off aggressively. Problems received immediate solutions using available resources, with surrender never entering consideration. This mentality defined him. This represents survival's fundamental essence, not superhuman capacity, but consistent application of ordinary human determination. Frank endured daily cold for 6 solid months, yet maintained fire continuously. Hunger gnawed constantly, yet he hunted persistently. Exhaustion threatened to overwhelm, yet he kept moving. Day after day, week after week, month after month, necessary tasks got completed. Survival followed from discipline and refusal to quit. Frank would spend 30 additional years in Alaska, working trappers, guiding, and predator control. His career wolf kills would exceed 500, including a 1939 specimen weighing 175 pounds, Alaska's largest documented wolf ever. He'd survive a charging grizzly, stopping it with 11 rounds from his beloved .20 Swift. He'd become legendary, Alaska's wolf man, earning deep respect from the territory's toughest inhabitants. Yet nothing in subsequent decades quite matched that 1923-1924 winter, when he spent half a year completely alone, enduring instantly lethal conditions while documenting caribou migration, proving that sufficient skill, determination, and toughness allows humans to survive nearly anything. Frank's lessons remain powerfully relevant despite our modern, heated comfort and instant connectivity. He survived through practical hands-on skills, meeting basic survival needs: warmth, shelter, sustenance, hydration. Mental preparation for guaranteed hardship proved equally vital, accepting that survival would involve pain and difficulty, then choosing to persevere anyway. Adaptability solved problems creatively using limited resources. When equipment failed, improvisation and innovation filled the gaps, fabricating necessities from available materials. Wilderness respect, without paralyzing fear, allowed effective operation despite genuine dangers from cold, predators, and potential fatal errors. Most critically, absolute refusal to surrender carried him through inevitable moments when cold, exhaustion, isolation, and circling wolves made death seem easier than continuing. Yet he persisted, maintaining fire, keeping weapons ready, advancing relentlessly until winter released him and he walked out alive. That refusal to quit defined everything. Frank Glazer's legacy extends beyond merely surviving 6 months at 60 below surrounded by wolf packs. He demonstrated human potential when total commitment meets consistent application of skill, determination, and toughness. He proved harsh wilderness yields to those willing to learn its lessons and pay its demanding price. Modern survival experts dissect Frank's methods obsessively, analyzing clothing, equipment, shelter techniques, hunting strategies, fire-making approaches. They attempt replicating his caribou hide sleeping bag, improvised snow goggles, and extreme cold warmth maintenance. Yet his most crucial lesson transcends technical replication or classroom instruction. Mental toughness and absolute surrender, refusal regardless of circumstances. Frank survived not through superior equipment or advanced techniques, but through his decision to survive and willingness to do absolutely whatever that required. Today's climate-controlled comfort makes delayed flights or slow internet seem like genuine hardship. Against this backdrop, Frank's story appears almost mythological, belonging to some bygone era. Yet it's verified history, not myth, documented reality of one man's winter ordeal in 1923-1924. The Black Rapids thermometer still stands, though the roadhouse has largely collapsed, reclaimed by wilderness. The mountains Frank traversed remain unchanged, cold, harsh, beautiful. Caribou still migrate in diminished numbers. Wolves still hunt, still vocalize in darkness, still embody Alaska's wild essence. Somewhere in those mountains, amid snow and ice and frozen silence, Frank Glazer's legacy persists, not in physical monuments, but in the knowledge that properly prepared, determined humans can survive anything. 6 months alone, no permanent shelter, 60 below, wolf packs. Frank lived it, survived it, demonstrating what refusal to quit makes possible. This is his story, his legacy, his lesson. Toughness isn't superhuman, but fully human, meeting challenges with skill, determination, and absolute refusal to surrender. Wilderness is harsh, yet survivable. Cold is brutal, yet endurable. Wolves are dangerous, yet outsmartable. Walking out after 6 months alone, having survived what should have killed you, having proven your capacity, that's when you truly understand being alive, being tested, being worthy of wild places and their challenges. Frank Glaser understood this completely. He lived it thoroughly. His story remains testament to human toughness and wilderness mastery, reminding us we're capable of far more than we imagine, if only we'll pay the price and refuse to quit.